After World War II, there was practically an explosion of microcars in the US. Brands like the three-wheeled Brogan and Publix, the Town Shopper, and the five-wheeled Bearcat all vied for attention, with most selling very few and disappearing very quickly. But famously, the King Midget lasted from 1946 to 1969. It managed to be profitable for most of its history and today has a passionate following helping keep the legacy alive. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. If you're new here, my name is John, and this is a far too brief history of King Midget. King Midget was started by Claude Dry and Dale Orcutt, former Civil Air Patrol pilots who believed that they could bring that industry's approach to the automotive sector. Both were machinists and both had built their own planes in their backyards. Founding Midget Motors in Athens, Ohio in 1945, they initially built the Supercycle scooter with two engine options of 2.25 or 6 horsepower. While overshadowed by the car, the scooter sold well into the early 60s. During conception of the car, they built 9 test cars, later saying it cost as much as 12 Cadillacs, and realized if a full-size car were simply scaled down, you'd still end up with a vehicle as costly and as complicated. So they figured to plan from the ground up. Differentials were heavy and expensive, so they made it one-wheel drive. Then they moved the engine to the rear on the drive wheel side to improve traction. The engine pole started, like a lawnmower. Their Model 1 launched in 1946. Their first vehicle cost just $133, and for comparison, this soapbox racer chassis ad from Popular Science in 1946 was $46. While the Midget one looks like a soapbox derby car, it was inspired by midget racers and required buyers to not only assemble it themselves on the wooden frame, including bending the sheet metal, but also provide the wheels, tires, and purchase the one-cylinder, 4-stroke side-valve, air-cooled, 6-horsepower Wisconsin engine separately to mount in the rear. Luckily, they had a catalog of parts called the Midget Motors Directory, published bi-monthly, that advertised government surplus parts such as wheels, tires, bearings, and engines that provided everything else you might need to build your car. Soon, they also began offering fully assembled cars. Importantly, they didn't set up a distribution network or service centers, instead advertising in popular magazines and selling direct to consumers, a product simple enough to be assembled at home and repaired by anyone who could work on a lawnmower. With tight financial controls, they kept the company profitable in spite of low volumes. Seeing the demand for a larger car, in 1951 they introduced the Model 2, now with a tubular steel and aircraft-style channel frame, 4-wheel independent suspension, windshield, canvas tops, brakes on all 4 wheels, a 2-speed automatic transmission now with reverse, and a 7.5 horsepower Wisconsin engine. In fact, those brakes were patented as they developed mechanical brakes that self-equalized with leverage and pulleys. The engine was still pull start, but they offered an optional starter. The car now weighed about 500 pounds and cost $500, with owners having the choice of mahogany or steel doors. With a 72-inch wheelbase and a 102-inch long body, it was dwarfed by the still small Crossley, with a body 3.4 feet longer. And consider Chevys of the time had a wheelbase of 115 inches that basically the entire car could fit into. The jump to the Model 2 was a leap of faith for the founders, taking on a $35,000 loan to build an 11,000 square foot factory and producing completed cars. It paid off with about 1,500 Model 2s sold between 51 and 56. Importantly, the company only produced cars when orders were received, typically in batches of about 25 vehicles. Again, keeping tight control on the finances in a niche market. After this success, in 1957, they introduced the Model 3, now with a unit body frame, hydraulic brakes, and a bit heavier at 700 pounds, and larger than before with a 76.5-inch wheelbase and 117-inch body. Prices now range from $825 to $950. And originally with a 9.25 horsepower Wisconsin engine, it was later upgraded to a 12 horsepower Kohler. In 1961, the electrical system was upgraded to 12 volts. By the mid-60s, the founders were ready to retire and they put the company up for sale. Joe Steinlen was the national sales manager for Britain's Roots Group and their Hillman line of autos. As the legend goes, he was supervising a promotional film for Hillman when he saw two King Midgets driven by locals. They raved about the great fuel economy and ruggedness of the Midget. Impressed and seeing an opportunity, he put together investors and bought the company in 1966. Investors want a return on their money, so Vernon Eads was hired as production manager to increase production without hiring any more people. Previously, the factory employed around 21 workers, with one shift welding chassis at night and a day shift assembling the cars, producing about 1.5 cars a day. Vernon streamlined production, and by 1969 they were building 4 cars a day. The new owners also abandoned the build-order model. Inventories grew, but sales didn't follow, even though the Model 3 now had a folding vinyl top and a 12-volt electrical system. By 1969 to about 1970, the IRS padlocked the plant for unpaid taxes, and the company descended unceremoniously into bankruptcy. About 3,000 Model 3s were sold over its run. Vernon bought what remained and formed Barthman Corporation, designed a new fiberglass dune buggy style body, and planned production was to be at a new plant in Florida. The new King Midget commuter was intended to reduce assembly cost. It kept the 12 horsepower Kohler engine but finally had a differential. In 1970, he assembled about a dozen of the Model 3s and 3 completed commuters, but a fire destroyed the only body mold. Production ended, with estimates placing the entire production over 20-plus years at 5,000. While it's easy to say that aggressive expansion after it was bought out led to the demise of King Midget, I believe that's only partially true. In the 70s, there were upcoming safety and emissions legislation that would have doomed the current model, and such a small manufacturer couldn't really shoulder the burden of redesigning their car to meet the new laws all by themselves. What's more surprising is that in a U.S. marketplace where bigger and longer ruled, the King Midget managed to survive for over 20 years. I can only imagine what it was like to be navigating parking lots and streets in a Midget with Eldorados lumbering around. But they have a passionate and active fan base. Several fans have, over the years, bought out all the old parts stock from King Midget and from Barthman, as well as the King Midget name, and today, one of them runs King Midget Auto Works as the largest supplier of parts to King Midget owners, although the website hasn't been updated since about 2018. And they have an active fan club with tons of information about the vehicles and, honestly, how to connect with other owners who are in love with them as well. And so once again, I want to thank my Patreons for their support. They help make this possible. And if you support independent news opinions and histories like this, please show this video some love, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment below, and thanks so much for being here.